I got involved in it, interestingly enough, because I couldn't really afford the wines that I wanted to buy. So I was trying to figure out a quantitative angle that would let me do something, buy some things that I couldn't normally afford.
There's some controversy fermenting within the wine community. At its center is an economist who claims he can analyze fine wines without ever savoring a drop.
Why did you even get involved in this? I mean, you're an economist.
Wine is what people call an experience good. You go to the store and you look at all these bottles and you don't know what it's going to taste like. You don't know what it's like until you open it. And then it's too late if you made a mistake. So even though it's incredibly difficult for people to tell wines apart, it's much more difficult than people realize. There are nevertheless price differences that clearly are in part justified by the quality differences. So I was trying to figure out how to learn about quality differences and to do that at a point where prices really hadn't fully adjusted to the observed quality of the wines.
If they spend any more than 20 bucks for a bottle, 30, 40, 50, what's the difference, and is it really worth what you're getting inside? How do you know?
What's in the bottle is the key, and what's in the bottle really depends on what kind of grapes you have.
I learned that you could predict what the ultimate quality of the wine will be from the weather that created the vintage itself. A vintage is all the wines that are produced from a particular growing season. You like to have a dry end of growing season, and then you need to have the growing season be warm enough so that you can get the grapes right. In places where you don't irrigate, it's nice to have a lot of rain in the winter. So we can explain quite a lot of the prices of the wines after they become mature, when they're drinkable. Bordeaux wines in particular are not so interesting when they're really young. They start to become interesting when they're about 10 years old. People collect them, fancy restaurants have them. You always buy old wines, you can go to the auctions and buy them. Here I could predict the prices of the older wines using the weather. The thing of it is, it made such a fantastic example in econometrics because there's no question about causality. There's no question that the weather must affect the prices. The prices certainly didn't change the weather. So it's one of those examples where regression analysis is totally justified and it actually quite successful. Now here's where the anomaly comes in. The vintages, when they come on the market, the farmers have the same costs every year. So they would like to get the same price for the grapes every year. If the vintages really differ in quality, it doesn't make sense that should be true. So what they do is they have a very grand scheme for keeping the prices stable when they're young. What that means is, if you're willing to keep the wines for 10 years, and if you know what the weather was that created the vintage, you can buy the ones that are underpriced as opposed to the ones that have to be overpriced to make this average come out. Once I know what it is about the weather that makes wines made from a certain kind of grape good, then I can ask myself, well, there are probably many places where these grapes are not planted. What would be a good place? And the answer to that question is, well, one that has the weather that matches what a good vintage would look like. Let's say we're talking about the Cabernet type of grapes that are grown in Bordeaux. South Jersey has temperatures just like in Bordeaux. I planted grapes in New Jersey. It's kind of a shocking idea. We do have vintage variability from year to year. We have a little bit more rain than they do. But this year we had a fantastic vintage. It was my first crop. I had 35,000 pounds of incredibly good, beautiful red grapes that are going to make some really good wine. This has now become an actual subject, the economics of wine. There's a thing called the American Association of Wine Economists. It has meetings every year. It's really an attempt to focus on a very special area so that you can think about bigger problems. Basically, once you get started on something like that, the number of uses for it becomes phenomenal. This is one of my favorite wines, actually, Chateau Brainerd de Cru. This is a $50 bottle of wine, the 120-acre vineyard. They make about 15,000 cases of wine, another 7,000 cases of a second wine that you can sell at a lower price. Is it really different from the first? That's unclear. Some people think it is, some people think it is sometimes, and some people think it isn't ever. It's about 70% Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot 22%. and some Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot. Actually, I grow all those grapes in New Jersey except for Merlot. So it makes now that's one example. Let me take a different one. Why am I not? I'm punching the wrong button, sorry. Thank you. Well, that's a $50 bottle. Here's a $600 bottle. I'm sorry I didn't use Lafite. I used the other Rothschild. Happened to be the example I had. 222-acre vineyard. It's a big vineyard. 18,000 cases of the main wine. Another 6,000 of the second wine, and it's 80% Cabernet. Not so much different from Brainerd to Cru. Now look at that. It's more than 10 times the price. This, by the way, you think about it for a second, 18,000 cases of wine at $600 a bottle. That's coming out of the chateau, by the way. This is an incredibly profitable piece of agricultural property. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is the property is worth a fortune. Let's take Napa, for example. Planted vineyards in Napa now, it used to be able to buy them for $5,000 an acre. It's now $500,000 an acre. $500,000 for 1 acre of planted property in Napa Valley. The Gallo family, you know this as well as I do, spent $500 million on the Stagecoach Vineyard. What's happened is the value of these wines gets capitalized into the land. Now, there's one interesting thing about this that I've always liked, because, by the way, I mention this in part because it begins to give people the scale of how valuable some of these things can be. The value added for Bordeaux wine from France is as much as haute couture, and haute couture doesn't have any raw materials they pay for. All they do is make very, very skimpy clothes that they sell at a huge price. These guys have to actually farm in order to get something out of it. But it's very important to understand that the scale of this can be enough to make it into a real industry. And that's happened in Napa, and it certainly has happened in France and other places. Now, this raises an immediate question, by the way, that I think is a little bit of economics. It's inevitable that you're going to have counterfeits when you have something that doesn't take very much to produce and costs a lot of money. So which one of those would you counterfeit? I don't think there's very much counterfeit Brainerd du Cru out there. But I'm pretty sure there's some Mouton, because I found a bottle last year. Now, take a look at it. By the way, it's very easy to counterfeit these things now. Why? Because laser printers are so damn good. You probably have a machine in this building that could make the most beautiful label in the world. Now, does anybody know why I know that's a counterfeit? By the way, this was at a dinner party. I feel kind of bad about this. I was at a dinner party in Belgium while I was doing my victory lap. We went to various places, and I ended up we flew in and out of Belgium, by the way, which I strongly recommend. Brussels airport is a million times more attractive than de Gaulle. Anybody know why that's, and why would they fake 1992? Is it 92? Yeah. Not particularly, well, and definitely not a good vintage. How do I know that? I did taste that wine. The wine was pretty good, by the way. But I know that because I know what the weather was in 1992. It was never going to produce a great vintage. Does anybody know how I can tell that's fake? From the label? It was kind of embarrassing because I was at a dinner party with about 20 people, and this woman had received this for a wedding gift some years before, and we drank it. It was quite tasty wine, by the way. Well, the reason is because you see the crink in the label? See that crimp? You know what that covers up? The serial number. Mouton puts a serial number in every label. They would never let that bottle out of the winery with that crimp, because you can't read the serial number. Now, if you were faking it, though, this is the hardest part of the job. You don't want to, when you fake it, it would be very easy to put the same serial number on every bottle. But then someone's going to find out right away, something wrong here. So instead, what they did is they crimped it. Extremely clever. But you can see it's a beautiful label, and it's not hard to counterfeit because it's not a great wine. It's perfectly okay. It's just a very expensive wine, but it's perfectly okay in this particular vintage. And we all drank it, and it was just, I have to admit, I felt kind of bad about explaining this to the people in the room. We were actually outside. Even in Brussels, you sometimes have days when you can sit outside, although it is without a doubt the worst weather of any city I've ever been in. So that was now, what's the important point here is people often ask me, well, why would anybody counterfeit a wine? Of course, the answer is to make money. But which wines are they going to counterfeit? They're never going to counterfeit cheap wines. You counterfeit expensive wines. That's economics. First thing you think of. So I love it when someone will ask me a question, why would they counterfeit that? The answer is expensive. That's what you're going to try to counterfeit. So I give you that as one of my favorite examples. So that's the gross revenue at Brainair, 10 million. It's good. That's good money. But at Mouton, it's 100 million. And on 220 acres. So it's incredibly valuable. I can't even imagine what an acre of that land would sell for. Now, this is my favorite. This is the place that I studied. That's France, in case you've forgotten. And that's the Bordeaux region. The Bay of Biscay is, if you've ever been through that, it's always rough and difficult. So this is there's a confluence of two rivers that run north there. Bordeaux probably means, it's probably a corruption of Latin, meaning by the edge of the water. Water is very important. But when I first visited, I was so puzzled about it because Mouton and Lafitte, by the way, are on the same, they're next to each other on a little hill. There's one of the few good drainages in that Medoc area. And I was stunned by that. And so what I did is I found this map. Now, what's interesting about this is just, I just blown up the Bordeaux region. You can see this Medoc, which is also a corruption of Latin, middle of the water. This finger of land, I bet this gives me a pointer, doesn't it? Does it give me a pointer? I don't know. Well, you can see that finger of land is the Medoc. Now, if you look at it for a second, you'll begin to see why fundamentals of grape growing are so important. This is actually a rainfall map. The dark area is the high rainfall area. That's like 900 millimeters and above for the year. Or is it 900? No, it's 1,000. And then it goes down. So you can see there's actually microclimates here. And what happens is the low rainfall microclimate comes swooping in, that's the light blue, over the two rivers and along the edge of the Medoc. Now, does everybody know where Lafitte and Mouton are? That's where they are in the Medoc. So when we talk about wine, we don't mean that whole peninsula, which is what, of course, is the Medoc. We mean that little strip of land along the river. All of the two that I mentioned, and all the great Bordeaux wines come mostly from that area, or they come from the other side of the river in Pomerol and Saint-Emilion, which are also in very low rainfall microclimate. So the key here is to understand that there are deep fundamentals here and not very hard to figure them out. Now, in order to really go very far with this, you need to have data. So what I did, I started a newsletter called Liquid Assets. What was it? This is before the internet, by the way. I would have done it totally differently if I were doing it after the internet. I wanted actually auction prices. Auction prices are probably as good as you're going to get a method for figuring out what something is worth. And so we hand collected all the data from all the auctions. Originally, all the auctions there were none in the United States. They were illegal. Every state in the country, wine auctions were illegal. Well, the one exception was Chicago, which is, someone explained to me, you could probably make a market in railroad tracks in Chicago because they like markets. But there were no auctions legally. They were all in London. Not in Paris, but in London. The auction, then New York, very clever, beautiful example of economics. They managed to get through the legislature a law that said that you could run an auction in New York City if if it was run by a merchant who'd been in business for 25 years. What was that? That was Don Zachariah producing his own auctions. So there are a small number of liquor stores that have been around that long. Now, what the lesson from that in economics is, this led to 2 or 3 competitors, and that's enough in economics. You don't need hundreds of people competing. You just need a few. So they all opened up in New York, and actually the world's wine world switched from London being the key place for secondary market to New York. And then, of course, that switched again when it all moved to Hong Kong. So now the biggest auctions primarily are in Hong Kong. I don't know how long that'll last, maybe move somewhere else. In any event, so that was what I did. I collected all these incredible amount of data. And that was how I started doing, saying something about what the wines were like, because I realized I was the only person really interested in these data. Well, not the only, but there might have been 200 people in the world interested in these data, and that wasn't enough to make the thing go. So I decided I had to write articles. And there are lots of articles that were in that thing. I did it over about 10 years. It hasn't been around now for a long time. I stopped doing it. Some of the great ones that you might find interesting. I did a ranking of the Chateau. I did it of Napa wines too. I did a ranking of the Chateau of Bordeaux. There's this famous 1855 classification. Now, I would bet that 90% of the people in this room don't know how that classification was put together. It wasn't done by any tasting at all. It was all done by prices. The brokers in Bordeaux were asked to rank the wines and to draw lines, just like, when you give grades, A, B, C, you get all the numbers and then you draw a line. That's where it all came from. Mouton was classified in the second thing, but is the top of the second. They're not alphabetical within group. It was all done by prices. I thought it was a brilliant, fantastic French method. So I did it again, because the old rating didn't have, there were lots of wineries that had come into existence since that time, and some of them were obscure and no one knew about them. So we did things like that. Now that requires a lot of data. And we were using lots and lots of data. And then that data was then ultimately used for me to try to figure out what the quality of a vintage was. The idea was that you would figure out what the quality of a vintage is by looking at what the average prices were when the wines were relatively mature. This is the last thing I want to say, and that was what was in that little video. And I'm going to turn this over to Carl, because I think I'm already gone over. So the way I think about it, a vineyard, is you want to maximize the land price. And you got to pick the right grape, and you have to select the right style for that grape, and you have to make no mistakes in winemaking. And after that, hopefully, you'll have something interesting. So the hedonic approach has really gone over in that thing. Actually, people are going to talk about this afternoon, so let me finish with what I want to talk about. Wine tasting awards. Now, there's one guy who has really done the gold medal work on this topic. His name is Bob Hodgson. Bob, who is a lovely man, he has a little winery in Northern California, in Eureka. Eureka, by the way, is the weed capital of the world. He was a professor at Humboldt State. And Bob he's a Italophile. So he makes mostly Italian style wines. He likes those. That's his thing. He's an Italophile. And he buys the grapes. He doesn't grow any grapes. In fact, I taught him how to prune. He never had pruned a grapevine. I thought, Bob, you've been making wine for 30 years and you have never seen a grapevine? No, I don't know anything about them. So I said, well, come down. Well, let's go. I'm going to show you how to prune a vine. And of course, he completely screwed it up. There is something to that. There's an art. Or at least an experience you need to have, like a good carpenter. But he's been making wine, and one year he had one of his wines. And by the way, in California, the way that people get wines noted is they put them in county fairs. Every county in the state has a wine fair, and the state itself has the California State Fair, which is the big one. So many wines that were ultimately first known about were learned about in the county fairs, and the LA County Fair is a huge thing. People send in their wines, and then there are judges, and they give out awards, and the awards are gold, silver, and bronze. Okay. Now, so Bob got, I think it was a silver maybe, for whatever it was, in the Mendocino County Fair. He was very excited. So then he said, this is great. I'm going to send this to the Sonoma County Fair. He didn't get anything. He sent it to two others, didn't get anything there either. And then he started wondering. So he collected all the data, all the medals. And this, by the way, is the most beautiful example of the binomial distribution that we have in nature. It turns out that across the counties, you have about a 10% chance of winning a gold medal if you enter your wine. What do you think are the chances that you'll get a gold medal in 2 county fairs if you enter 2? 0.01. It's 0.1 times 0.1. In other words, there is zero information. You just enter. There's a lesson here, which is you just enter your wines in all the county fairs, and you're definitely going to get a gold medal because there's so many counties. And you forget the other ones. Don't talk about them. Well, who needs to know about them? Well, Bob figured this out, and he just went through the data in California. This is published in the Journal of Wine Economics. It is the most beautiful example, just purely empirical. It fits the binomial distribution perfectly. So that's a tip-off that the judging isn't very good. So Bob, bless his heart, he didn't mean this. He didn't do it as a mean way. See, I would have been kind of mean and said, "This shows you what a bunch of bums these judges are." That Bob would no, that's all wrong. You wouldn't do that. Well, Bob decided that he would get himself in the judges panel at the California State Fair, and he got himself on the judges panel of the California State Fair, and he came to think that nobody knew what they were doing. So he did something absolutely astonishing. One of the greatest field experiments ever done in the world of wine, maybe in the world of anything. He got them to enter in a panel of 10 wines, 3 that were the same. And he collected the data for 3 years. And you can probably guess the answer to what he found, which is that, we got to get to the next one, because that's the end of the thing. Actually, I'm not sure. What he found was that if one of them got a gold medal, the other one was likely to get a gold medal as any of the other wines in the list. So really there wasn't anything. We now know that some of this manipulation everybody knows about. So for example, I know at least one example where a winery sent to the Wine Spectator wines under the same wine under several different labels. And of course they picked the one that got the highest score to put the actual label on. So these things tell you that to some extent, once it's understood about this, there's more manipulation than you expect.